The millionaire, seeking peace after a long and exhausting journey, decided to take a walk in a park to clear his mind. However, he was shocked to encounter his ex-wife, accompanied by two children who looked exactly like him, playing the guitar on the street to earn money. His heart started racing, and a mix of disbelief and curiosity took hold of him. This can't be a coincidence. Are they my children? He wondered, as he carefully observed the resemblance. Without hesitation, he approached, determined to confront his ex and uncover the truth. Alexander Morgan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his newly acquired penthouse apartment in Manhattan, gazing at the city sprawling beneath him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the urban landscape, painting the glass and steel structures in hues of amber and gold. At 42, he had achieved everything he had set out to accomplish 5 years ago when he left for Asia, or so he thought. His reflection in the window showed a man transformed by success, perfectly. When tailored charcoal suit, expertly trimmed salt and pepper hair, and the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. The past 5 years had been a whirlwind of mergers, acquisitions, and strategic expansions that had transformed his modest consulting firm into a global enterprise. Now, with offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo, Alexander Morgan was a name that carried weight in international business circles, yet standing in his immaculate apartment, surrounded by modern furniture that had never been sat on and art pieces that had never been truly admired, Alexander felt an unfamiliar emptiness. The excitement of closing his latest deal, a billion-dollar merger in Southeast Asia, had faded faster than usual. The endless string of congratulatory messages on his phone felt hollow, each notification a reminder of connections that were purely transactional. "Perhaps I need some fresh air," he murmured to himself, loosening his tie. The idea of spending another evening reviewing reports and projections suddenly seemed suffocating. Without much thought, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, something he rarely did without a specific destination or purpose in mind. The doorman's surprised expression at seeing him leave the building in the middle of the afternoon spoke volumes about his usual routine. The spring air hit his face as he stepped onto the sidewalk, carrying with it the mixed sense of blooming trees and city life. Almost instinctively, his feet carried him toward Central Park, a place he hadn't visited since his return to New York 3 weeks ago. As he walked, Alexander found himself noticing things he usually ignored: the elderly couple sharing a pretzel on a bench, a young father teaching his daughter to ride a bike, a group of friends sprawled on the grass, their laughter carrying across the park. These simple moments of human connection stirred something in him, a recognition of what had been missing from his life of spreadsheets and board meetings. Finding an empty bench near the lake, Alexander sat down, his posture gradually relaxing. As he watched the world move around him, a light breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the distant sounds of children playing and dogs barking. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply exist in the moment, without checking his phone or thinking about his next meeting. Little did he know that this unplanned moment of respite was about to shatter the carefully constructed world he had built around himself. As the afternoon light filtered through the trees, fate was preparing to remind him of everything he had left behind in his relentless pursuit of success. The park, with its steady stream of lives intersecting and diverging, was about to become the stage for a reunion that would force him to confront the true cost of his ambitions. The peaceful afternoon atmosphere was broken by the gentle strumming of guitar strings. Alexander barely registered the sound at first, his mind still wandering through memories of board meetings and business deals. But as the melody grew clearer, something about it tugged at his consciousness, a familiar pattern, a style he'd heard before long ago. He turned his head toward the source of the music, and the world suddenly stopped spinning. There, about 50 feet away, sat a woman with honey blonde hair, her fingers dancing across the strings of a weathered acoustic guitar. Despite the years that had passed, he would have recognized Caroline anywhere. The sight of her hit him like a physical blow, forcing all the air from his lungs. She looked different from the woman he'd left behind. Her face was thinner, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her clothes were simple, faded jeans and a well-worn denim jacket, a far cry from the fashionable outfits she used to wear when they were together. But it was the weariness in her posture that struck him most deeply, the subtle slope of her shoulders suggesting a weight he couldn't begin to comprehend. As his brain struggled to process this unexpected sight, movement caught his eye. 3 children sat on a blanket spread near Caroline's feet, and the revelation that followed nearly brought him to his knees. They appeared to be around 4 or 5 years old, exactly the age they would be if... His mind raced back to the last time he'd seen Caroline, counting the months, connecting dots he'd never known existed. The children were engrossed in different activities. One boy was deeply focused on a picture book, another was constructing an elaborate structure with wooden blocks, and a little girl was drawing in a sketchbook, her tongue stuck out in concentration. But it wasn't there. Activities that held Alexander's attention, it was their faces. He saw his own features reflected in their small profiles. His prominent cheekbones, his straight nose, even the way one of the boys furrowed his brow in concentration, exactly as Alexander did when focused on a problem. Time seemed to freeze as the implications washed over him. Twins weren't uncommon in his family. His mother was a twin herself, but triplets. The reality of what he was seeing threatened to overwhelm him. These weren't just any children. They were undeniably his children, children he hadn't known existed, children who had grown up without him while he was chasing success across Asia. A small group of tourists passed between them, momentarily blocking his view. When they cleared, Alexander found himself staring directly into Caroline's eyes. She had looked up from her guitar, perhaps sensing his presence, and their gazes locked across the space between them. The melody she had been playing came to an abrupt stop, the final note hanging unresolved in the air. The recognition in her eyes was immediate, followed by a complex series of emotions that flashed across her face too quickly for Alexander to process: surprise, pain, anger, and something else he couldn't quite identify. The children, noticing their mother's sudden silence, looked up from their activities, following her gaze to where Alexander sat. He saw Caroline's hand tighten on the neck of her guitar, her knuckles turning white. The little girl tugged at her sleeve, asking something. Alexander couldn't hear, but Caroline didn't respond. She seemed as frozen as he was, caught in this impossible moment neither of them could have anticipated. Alexander's carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. Every achievement, every deal, every $1 billion he'd earned suddenly felt meaningless. In the face of this revelation, the weight of 5 years of absence crashed down upon him, along with the devastating realization that he hadn't just abandoned his wife, he had abandoned his children, 3 innocent lives he hadn't even known. He'd helped create. His legs moved of their own accord, standing him up from the bench. The distance between them seemed both insurmountable and too close all at once. In that moment, Alexander Morgan, the man who had built an empire across Asia, had no idea what to do next. Alexander's feet carried him forward before his mind could catch up, each step feeling like an eternity. The familiar sounds of the park, children laughing, birds singing, cyclists whizzing past, faded into a distant hum. All he could hear was the thundering of his own heartbeat and the whisper of his shoes against the path. Caroline's expression hardened as he approached, her hand instinctively moving to rest on the shoulder of the nearest child, the little boy with the picture book. The gesture was subtle but clear, protective, maternal, a silent warning that these children were her world, Caroline, Alexander managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The name felt foreign on his tongue after so many years of deliberately not speaking it. The little girl looked up at him curiously, her green eyes, his eyes, studying his face with innocent interest. "Mummy, who's that?" she asked, clutching her sketchbook closer to her chest. Caroline took a deep breath, her fingers absently stroking the guitar strings. "Lily, why don't you and your brothers pack up your things? We should be heading home soon." Her voice was steady, but Alexander could detect the slight tremor beneath her composed exterior. "But I'm not finished with my drawing," Lily protested, looking between her mother and the stranger who had captured her attention. "James, help your sister pack up," Carolyn instructed the more energetic-looking boy, who had already begun gathering his wooden blocks. The third child, the one with the book, hadn't moved, his eyes fixed on Alexander with an intensity that felt eerily familiar. "You're wearing a suit like the men in my book," the boy said suddenly, his voice clear and measured. "Are you a businessman?" Alexander felt his throat tighten. "Yes, I am. My name is Alexander. And you are?" "Ethan," the boy replied, still not moving to pack up his book. "Did you know my mom from before?" The simple question landed like a punch to the gut. Caroline intervened before Alexander could respond. "Ethan, please help your siblings. We need to go." But Alexander couldn't let them leave, not yet. "Caroline, please, can we talk?" He gestured to the empty bench nearby. "Just for a moment." She studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes clouded with emotions he couldn't quite read. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Children, stay where I can see you. Pack your things, but you can play for a few more minutes." As they moved to the bench, Alexander noticed how the children immediately formed their own little circle, but kept glancing over at them with undisguised curiosity. James whispered something to Lily that made her giggle, while Ethan continued to watch them intently over the top of his book. "They're beautiful," Alexander said softly, unable to take his eyes off the trio. "They are," Caroline agreed, her voice carrying a hint of steel. "They're also kind, intelligent, and incredibly resilient, no thanks to you." "I didn't know," he started, but Caroline cut him off with a sharp laugh. "You didn't know because you chose not to know, Alexander. I tried to reach you. God knows I tried. Emails, phone calls, letters to your office. I even flew to Singapore when I was 4 months pregnant, but your assistant said you were unavailable for personal matters." Each word hit him like a physical blow. He remembered that period. He had been in the middle of his first major acquisition, working 20-hour days, deliberately shutting out anything that might distract him from his goals. How many of her attempts to contact him had he ignored or dismissed? "I was focused on building something," he said weakly. "I thought I was creating a better future." "A better future?" Caroline's voice cracked slightly. "While you were building your empire, I was working 3 jobs to make ends meet. When the triplets got sick with pneumonia at age 2, I had to borrow money from my sister to pay the hospital bills. Every milestone, every first word, every step, you missed it all because you were too busy building something." Alexander watched as James helped Lily zip up her backpack, while Ethan meticulously arranged his books. These everyday moments. How many thousands of them had he missed? The weight of his absence pressed down on him like a physical presence. "Tell me about them," he said quietly. "Please. I want to know everything." Caroline was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the worn edges of her guitar. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, though no less guarded. "There'll be 5 next month. Ethan was born first. He's our old soul, always thinking, always watching. James came second. He's our adventurer, full of energy and questions. And Lily, she's the artist, the dreamer. She sees beauty in everything." Alexander absorbed every word, trying to match these descriptions with the children before him. his children. The thought still felt surreal, like a dream he might wake from at any moment. "What happens now?" he asked, knowing he had no right to expect anything, yet unable to imagine walking away again. Caroline looked at him directly, her gaze unflinching. "That depends entirely on you, Alexander. But understand this, if you want to be part of their lives, it has to be all or nothing. They've never had a father. I won't let them experience having one only to lose him again." "We need to head home now," Caroline said, rising from the bench. "It's almost dinner time, and they have homework to finish." She spoke with the practiced efficiency of someone who had mastered the art of managing multiple schedules simultaneously. Alexander glanced at his watch, 5:30 p.m. At this time, on a normal day, he would be reviewing market reports or conducting video calls with Asian investors. Instead, he found himself saying, May I walk with you?" Caroline hesitated, then nodded slightly. "It's not far." She turned to the children, who were already shouldering their backpacks. "Ready, my little bears." "Ready," James announced, bouncing on his toes. "Race you to the corner, Lily." "James," Caroline called out with gentle authority, "what's our rule about running ahead?" The little boy's enthusiasm deflated slightly. "Stay where you can see us," he recited, then brightened again. "Can we walk fast, though?" "Walking fast is fine," Caroline smiled, gathering her guitar into its worn case. Alexander noticed how she carefully tucked away the few dollar bills that had been dropped into the open case. Not more than $20, for what he assumed had been hours of playing. They set off down the tree-lined path, the children forming a loose cluster. Ahead of them, Alexander observed how naturally they moved as a unit, James in the lead, but constantly looking back, Lily in the middle humming to herself, and Ethan bringing up the rear, still clutching his book. They had the unconscious choreography of siblings who had spent their entire lives together. "They go to public school 87, Caroline explained as they walked. "I chose the apartment partly because it's within walking distance. The school has a good program for gifted children, which has been especially helpful for Ethan." Alexander absorbed this information hungrily. "Are they all in the same class?" "No, we decided to separate them. It helps them develop their own identities." Caroline adjusted the guitar case on her shoulder, and Alexander instinctively reached to take it. She shook her head, declining his offer. "They each have different strengths. Ethan's already reading at a third-grade level. James excels in science and anything hands-on. Lily's art teacher says she has extraordinary spatial awareness for her age." They turned onto a quieter street, lined with pre-war buildings. The contrast between this neighborhood and Alexander's luxurious downtown district was stark. Here, laundry lines stretched between buildings, and window air conditioning units hummed against the spring warmth. Small businesses occupied the ground floors, a bodega, a laundromat, a family-run pharmacy. "This is our building," Caroline said, stopping in front of a 6-story walk-up. The brick facade was well-worn but dignified, with window boxes sporting the first blooms of spring. "4th floor," she added, leading the way up the narrow stairwell. The children bounded ahead, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Alexander noticed how Caroline paced herself on the stairs, conserving energy with the practiced efficiency of someone who made this climb multiple times a day. The apartment door opened into a modest living room that immediately told the story of their lives. A small collection of mismatched furniture had been arranged to maximize the space. The walls were covered with children's artwork, primarily Lily's, Alexander guessed, and educational posters. A fold-out table near the window was clearly the homework station, with 3 small chairs tucked neatly underneath. "Home sweet home," Caroline said, with a mixture of pride and apology in her voice. "Kids, shoes off, please. Homework first, then dinner." Alexander stood in the doorway, taking in every detail. A basket of laundry waited to be folded. 3 identical lunchboxes were lined up on the kitchen counter. A calendar on the wall was filled with color-coded entries, doctor appointments, school events, music lessons. This was what real life looked like. This was what he had missed. The children seemed unsure what to make of his presence. Ethan had already settled into what was clearly his favorite reading spot, a worn beanbag in the corner, but his eyes kept darting to Alexander over his book. James was practically vibrating with unasked questions, while Lily lingered near her mother, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. "Would you like to see my drawing?" Lily suddenly asked, her voice small but determined. "I made it in the park." Alexander felt his heart leap. "I would love to," he replied, careful to keep his voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. As Lily opened her sketchbook, Alexander caught Caroline's eye. She was watching the interaction with an unreadable expression, but he could sense the protective instinct radiating from her. This was her world, her carefully constructed safe haven for their children. His presence here was both an intrusion and a potential source of hope or heartbreak. He knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next would change all their lives forever. The question was, could he prove himself worthy of the second chance he never knew he needed? Lily's drawing showed the park where they had just been rendered in the bold, uninhibited strokes of a child's hand. But what caught Alexander's attention wasn't the technical skill, it was the detail. She had captured the way the afternoon light filtered through the trees, represented by yellow lines streaming between green clouds of leaves. In the center was a figure with a guitar, surrounded by 3 smaller figures. "That's Mommy," Lily explained, pointing to the guitar player, "and that's us. We sit with her every Tuesday and Thursday after school while she plays music." Alexander's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, Lily. You've captured the light perfectly." He noticed a dark-suited figure in the background of the drawing, partially hidden behind a tree. "And who's that?" Lily's cheeks reddened slightly. "That's you. I added you after I saw you watching us." From the kitchen area, Caroline's movements faltered slightly as she prepared what appeared to be a simple pasta dinner. Alexander could see her struggling to maintain her composure, her hands busy with automatic tasks, while her attention was fixed on their interaction. "Mrs. Rodriguez from 2B usually watches them while I play," Caroline explained, her voice carefully neutral. "But she's been sick this week, so they've had to come with me." "I like coming with Mommy," James interjected, abandoning his homework to join the conversation. "Sometimes people give us hot chocolate from the cart, and I get to count the money people put in the guitar case. I'm really good at counting." "James," Caroline reminded gently, "your math homework?" But Mom," James protested, "Alexander might want to see my science project. I built a solar system model, and Ms. Thompson said it was the best in class." His eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Want to see it?" Before anyone could respond, he darted to a shelf and carefully brought down a detailed model of the solar system, constructed from painted styrofoam balls and wire. "See, each planet is exactly the right size compared to the others. Ethan helped me with the calculations." Alexander found himself drawn into James's orbit, letting the boy explain each planet and its unique features. The child's enthusiasm was infectious, and his knowledge impressive. "Jupiter has 79 known moons," James explained seriously, "but I only put the 4 biggest ones because we ran out of styrofoam balls." "The store was closed," Ethan added quietly from his beanbag. "They were too expensive to buy more." It was a simple statement of fact, but it hit Alexander like a physical blow. While he had been spending millions on corporate expansions, his children had been counting pennies for school projects. "Dinner in 15 minutes, Caroline announced. "Please finish your homework, James. Lily, it's your turn to set the table." Alexander watched as Lily carefully put away her sketchbook and moved to help her mother, standing on a small step stool to reach the plates in the cabinet. There was a practiced rhythm to their movements, each child knowing their role in the household routine. "The table only has 4 chairs," Ethan observed, finally closing his book. The statement hung in the air, both an observation and a question. Caroline paused, wooden spoon hovering over the pot of pasta. "Alexander probably needs to get back to his office," she said, but her tone made it clear she was leaving the decision to him. Alexander pulled out his phone, looking at the dozens of notifications he'd been ignoring for the past hour. Meeting requests, urgent emails, messages from his executive team, his usual world demanding his attention. With a swift movement, he turned off the phone completely. "Actually," he said, "I'd love to stay for dinner, if that's all right." He directed the question to Caroline, but his eyes moved to include all of them. A moment of silence followed, broken by James's excited, "I can get the folding chair from the closet. Dad can sit next to me." The word "dad" seemed to freeze everyone in place. It was the first time any of the children had used it, and it had slipped out so naturally, so easily. Caroline's hands gripped the counter edge, while Lily stopped, midway through placing a fork on the table. Even James seemed surprised by what he'd said. Ethan, ever the observer, broke the tension. "The pasta will overcook if we don't drain it now," he said practically, "and overcooked pasta gets mushy." The mundane observation startled a laugh from Caroline, dispelling some of the awkwardness. "You're right, as usual, Ethan. Lily, finish. The table, please. James, yes, you can get the folding chair." As the children resumed their tasks, Alexander caught Caroline's eye across the small kitchen. In that moment, they shared a look of understanding. This dinner would be more than just a meal. It would be their first step into unknown territory, where every word and gesture could shape their future as a family. The folding chair creaked slightly under Alexander's weight as he sat at the small table, feeling oddly oversized in this intimate space. The pasta was simple, spaghetti with marinara sauce and whatever vegetables Caroline had managed to incorporate. But the aroma brought back memories of early dating days when they'd cooked together in her tiny studio apartment. "We always start with our best part, hard part," Lily announced, straightening her fork with precision. "Everyone has to share the best part of their day and the hard part." "Would you like to start, Lily?" Caroline asked, serving portions that Alexander noticed were carefully measured. No excess, no waste. Lily nodded, her face serious. "My best part was drawing in the park and getting the light just right in the trees. The hard part was when Jenny said my shoes were too old during recess." She looked down at her worn sneakers, then quickly back, up with a brave smile. "But Mommy said we can put sparkly laces in them to make them special." Alexander's hand twitched toward his phone instinctively, wanting to immediately order her an entire shoe store worth of options, but he stopped himself. This wasn't about throwing money at problems. He needed to understand their world. "In first, my turn." James practically bounced in his seat. "My best part was showing Alexander my solar system, and my hard part was—" He scrunched his face in thought. "Probably when I got a paper cut from my science worksheet, but it's okay because I got a Spider-Man Band-Aid." "Ethan?" Caroline prompted gently. "Best part was finishing my book about ancient Egypt," Ethan said quietly. "Hard part was not having enough money for the next book in the series at the school book fair." He glanced at Alexander. "The library has it, but there's a waiting list." Each simple statement revealed volumes about their lives, the careful management of resources, the small disappointments, the creative solutions to make do with what they had. Alexander felt every word like a weight on his chest. "What about you, Alexander?" Caroline asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes challenging. "What was your best part and hard part today?" The question caught him off guard. How could he possibly compress the emotional earthquake of this day into such simple terms? My best part was meeting all of you, he said carefully, and my hard part was realizing how much I've missed. James tilted his head. But you're here now, right? So you won't miss things anymore? The hopeful question hung in the air like a delicate soap bubble. Caroline's hand tightened around her fork, but she remained silent, letting Alexander navigate this crucial moment. I would very much like to be here, Alexander replied slowly, choosing his words with more care than he'd ever used in any business. Negotiation. If your mother agrees, and if you all would want that, I would like to be part of your lives. Do you know how to play catch? James asked suddenly. Tommy's dad plays catch with him in the park on Saturdays. I do know how to play catch, Alexander answered, his voice roughening slightly. I used to play baseball in college. Really? James's eyes widened. I have a baseball glove. It's secondhand, but Mom got it cleaned really good, and I oil it every week, just like the YouTube video showed us. James, Caroline interjected softly, remember to eat your dinner before it gets cold. The conversation shifted to smaller things, school stories, neighborhood characters, daily routines. Alexander learned that Ethan had won the school spelling bee, that Lily took free art classes at the community center on Saturdays, that James had memorized every planet's moons and could recite them in order. But it was the subtle details that painted the fuller picture. How Caroline cut vegetables into tiny pieces to hide them in the sauce, how the children automatically saved their napkins for future use, how they each had specific responsibilities. For cleanup. This wasn't poverty. Caroline had managed to create a stable, loving home. But it was a life of careful calculation, where every resource was maximized and nothing was taken for granted. Can Alexander help with dishes? Lily asked as they finished eating. He could dry while you wash, Mummy. That's what Mrs. Rodriguez does when she stays for dinner. Caroline hesitated, then nodded. If he'd like to. I would, Alexander said quickly, standing to help clear the table. As they worked together in the small kitchen, the children sprawled in the living room with their remaining homework, he finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. Why the park performances? He murmured, accepting a wet plate from her hands. Caroline's movements didn't falter. Medical bills, she said quietly. Even with insurance, the triplets' last checkup was expensive, and Ethan needs new glasses soon. She handed him another plate. The restaurant where I waitress cut back hours, and my online transcription work only pays so much. The park brings in extra cash, plus the children can be with me instead of needing additional childcare. Alexander dried the plate with mechanical movements, his mind racing through calculations. His youngest executive made more in a month than Caroline probably saw in a year. The thought made him feel slightly ill. Caroline, Don't. She cut him off firmly but quietly. Not tonight. Tonight is just about them meeting you, about starting to understand who you are. Everything else, the past, the future, the practical details, that's for another conversation, one we need to have after they're asleep. As if on cue, Lily's voice carried from the living room. Mommy, can Alexander read us our bedtime story tonight? He talks nice, like the audiobooks at school. Caroline's hands stilled in the soapy water. This simple request represented so much more than just a story. It was an invitation into their most intimate family ritual, their safe space at the end of each day. She looked at Alexander, her expression both protective and uncertain. That depends, she said, raising her voice slightly so Lily could hear. It's a long story, and Alexander might need to leave. Alexander met her gaze steadily. I have nowhere else I need to be, he said, and for the first time in years he meant it completely. The children's bedroom was small but expertly organized to accommodate 3 growing children. 3 narrow beds were arranged in a U-shape, each with its own small reading light and a carefully curated collection of books on floating shelves above. The walls were covered in a mixture of educational posters, star charts, and Lily's artwork. A single dresser with labeled drawers stood against one wall, while a shared closet housed 3 distinct sections of clothes. "You can sit in the reading chair," Lily offered, pointing to a well-worn armchair in the corner. "That's where Mommy always sits." Caroline handed Alexander a book, The Phantom Toll Booth, with a bookmark placed about halfway through. "They've been reading a chapter each night," she explained softly. "They're at chapter 8. As Alexander settled into the chair, he noticed how each child had already found their preferred bedtime position. Ethan lay on his side, glasses neatly folded on his bedside shelf, eyes alert and focused. James was sitting, cross-legged, practically vibrating with energy despite the late hour. Lily had wrapped herself in her blanket like a cocoon, only her face visible, clutching a worn, stuffed elephant. "The Weatherman," Alexander began reading, quickly falling into the rhythm of the story. He found himself naturally adding different voices for each character, earning a giggle from James when he made the Weatherman sound particularly flustered. Lily's eyes grew heavy as he read, while Ethan remained attentive to every word, occasionally mouthing along with the more complex vocabulary. Caroline stood in the doorway, watching this scene unfold. Her expression was complicated, a mixture of protection, longing, and cautious hope. As Alexander read about Milo's journey through the doldrums, she quietly went about the evening routine, laying out clothes for tomorrow, checking backpacks, sorting through papers that needed signing. When the chapter ended, James immediately begged for another, but Caroline stepped in. "One chapter only. You know the rules. Tomorrow's a school day." The bedtime ritual that followed was clearly well established. Each child took turns in the bathroom, returning in pajamas with freshly brushed teeth. Caroline went to each bed, offering hugs and whispered conversations that Alexander couldn't quite hear, but he noticed how she spent exactly the same amount of time with each child. "Can Alexander give us hugs too?" James asked hopefully. Caroline's breath caught, but before she could respond, Ethan spoke up. "Maybe not hugs yet," he said thoughtfully. "We just met him. But maybe high fives." Alexander felt a rush of gratitude for this perceptive child who had somehow found the perfect middle ground. "High fives sound perfect," he agreed, moving to each bed to carefully tap each small palm raised to meet his. "Good night, Alexander," Lily mumbled, already half asleep. "Thank you for doing the funny voices." Once the door was partially closed, it left open just enough for the hallway light to create a reassuring glow, Caroline gestured for Alexander to follow her back to the living room. The apartment felt different now, heavier with the weight of unspoken words. "Would you like some tea?" Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. At his nod, she moved to the kitchen, her actions precise and quiet. "I have chamomile. Or green tea. They're just tea bags, nothing fancy." "Chamomile is fine," Alexander replied, matching her hushed tone. He watched as she filled 2 mugs with hot water from an electric kettle that had clearly seen better days. Every movement spoke of carefully learned efficiency, the way she squeezed 2 tea bags with 1 spoon to save time, the practiced tilt of the kettle to avoid its noisy spot. They settled on opposite ends of the small sofa, the mugs of tea creating fragrant clouds of steam between them. For a long moment neither spoke, both processing the extraordinary events of the day. "They're amazing children," Alexander finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "They are," Caroline agreed. "They're resilient, kind, and so much smarter than I was at their age." She paused, taking a careful sip of her tea. "They're also vulnerable, Alexander. They've never had a father figure in their lives, and now suddenly you're here, reading bedtime stories and promising to play catch. I need to know, really know, what your intentions are. The directness of her question was reminiscent of the Caroline he'd first fallen in love with, the woman who could cut through corporate doublespeak with a single pointed observation. She had always been able to see through his carefully constructed facades. "I want to be their father," he said simply. "Not just financially, though of course I want to help with that, but really be their father. I want to know their favorite books, help with science projects, learn what makes each of them unique." He set his mug down carefully. "I know. I have no right to ask for this chance, Caroline. What I did, leaving you, it's unforgivable. And finding out about the children, about everything you've gone through alone." "Stop!" Caroline held up a hand. "This isn't about me or about your guilt. This is about them. I need to know that you understand what being their father really means. It's not just baseball games and bedtime stories. It's doctor appointments and parent-teacher conferences. It's being there when they're sick, when they're scared, when they fail at something and need to learn how to try again. It's showing up, Alexander, every day, not just when it's convenient or fun." The steel in her voice made it clear. This was not a negotiation. This was Caroline laying out the terms of engagement, protecting her children the way she had been doing since the moment she knew they existed. Alexander leaned forward, his expression more sincere than any he'd worn in a corporate boardroom. "Tell me everything, Caroline. Tell me what I've missed, what they need, what you've been through. I want to understand. I need to understand." Caroline studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said, settling back against the sofa. "Let's start from the beginning." Caroline curled her fingers around her mug, drawing strength from its warmth as she began her story. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you left for Singapore. I tried calling you immediately, but you'd already changed your number. Your secretary said you were restructuring your communications to maximize efficiency." The words carried an echo of old pain. "When I finally managed to get through to your office, you were always in meetings. I left messages, sent emails, even registered letters. After 3 months of nothing, I used the last of our joint savings to fly to Singapore." She took another sip of tea, her hands steady despite the weight of the memories. "The day I arrived at your office building, I was so sick from mourning. Sickness and the flight that I could barely stand. Your new assistant took one look at my condition and said you were unavailable for personal matters. She offered to pass along a message, but mentioned you were focusing on building your future and had left strict instructions about personal interruptions." Alexander closed his eyes, remembering that period. He had been obsessed with proving himself in the Asian market, working around the clock, deliberately cutting all ties to his old life. "I told them to deflect anything that wasn't business-related," he admitted quietly. "I convinced myself it was necessary for success." "While you were building your empire," Caroline continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, "I was facing the reality of being pregnant with triplets on my own. The doctor called it a high-risk pregnancy. I needed bed rest for the last 2 months, which meant I couldn't work. My sister Sarah took me in, helped me through the worst of it." She stood up, moving to a small bookshelf, and pulled out a worn photo album. "This is what you missed," she said, opening it to reveal a picture of herself in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but radiant, with 3 tiny bundles in her arms. Ethan came first. He was the biggest, almost 5 pounds. James followed 2 minutes later. Lily. Caroline's voice softened. Lily was the smallest, barely 4 pounds. She spent her first week in the NICU. I couldn't even hold her properly at first. She was so tiny, covered in tubes and monitors. Alexander reached for the album with trembling hands. The next pages showed the progression of their early days. 3 car seats crammed into Sarah's old sedan, the first tiny apartment with a makeshift nursery. Caroline looking increasingly tired, but always smiling in the photos. The medical bills were overwhelming, Caroline continued. Even with insurance, having triplets meant countless checkups, vaccinations, special formula when I couldn't produce enough milk for all 3. I took any job I could work from home, data entry, transcription, virtual assistant work. Sarah helped when she could, but she had her own family to support. She turned another page, showing the triplets at about 6 months old. This was when I started the restaurant job. The owner let me work split shifts so I could be home for their important moments. That's also when I started playing in the park. First just weekends, then more regularly as expenses grew. Were there no assistance programs? Alexander asked, studying a photo of the 3 babies sleeping in a single crib, their tiny hands touching. We got some help, Caroline acknowledged. WIC for formula and basic foods, a local charity that provided second-hand baby equipment. But raising triplets, everything is multiplied by 3. 3 sets of clothes, 3 sets of shoes, 3 of everything, and they grow so fast at that age. She paused, collecting her thoughts. The hardest part wasn't even the financial strain. It was being there for each of them equally. When Ethan said his first word, it was book, by the way, I worried that I wasn't giving James and Lily enough attention. When James took his first steps, I felt guilty for not capturing it on video because I was feeding Lily. Every milestone was a mixture of joy and guilt. Alexander noticed how the photos changed as the children grew. Fewer professional portraits, more candid shots taken by Caroline or Sarah. There were birthday parties with homemade cakes, Christmas mornings with modest but thoughtfully chosen presents, first days of preschool with bright backpacks and nervous smiles. They started showing their personalities so early, Caroline said, her voice warming with pride. Ethan was always observing everything, trying to understand how things worked. James couldn't stay still, always exploring, always asking questions. And Lily, she smiled softly. Lily found beauty everywhere. She'd collect fallen leaves and turn them into art projects, or sing little songs about the shapes she saw in the clouds. The album ended with recent photos, including one from what appeared to be a school talent show. This was 2 months ago, Caroline explained. Ethan did a presentation on ancient Egypt, James demonstrated his solar system model, and Lily showed her art portfolio. They each won ribbons in different categories. She closed the album carefully, running her hand over its worn cover. I've tried to give them everything they need, stability, education, love, but there are things, experiences I haven't been able to provide. Ethan wants to join the science camp this summer, but the fees, she shook her head. James begs for baseball lessons, but between equipment costs and class fees. And Lily, she has such talent but art supplies. Alexander listened, each word painting a clearer picture of the life his children had lived without him. The magnitude of what he had missed, what they had all endured, settled over him like a heavy blanket. They're happy, Caroline said firmly, meeting his eyes. That's what I need you to understand. Despite everything, despite not having you here, they're happy, well-adjusted children. If you're going to be in their lives now, it has to be to add to that happiness, not disrupt it. They don't need to be rescued or showered with expensive gifts. They need consistency, presence, and love. The challenge in her voice was clear. Could the man who had abandoned everything for success now learn to prioritize the simple, profound act of being present for his children? Alexander sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of Caroline's words settling around him. His phone, still turned off, felt like a lead weight in his pocket, a symbol of the world he'd prioritized over everything else. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I want to do this right, he said slowly, choosing each word with care. Not with grand gestures or by throwing money at problems, but by being here, really here. He met Caroline's gaze. I know I can't make up for lost time, but I want to be part of their future. All of their futures, including yours. Caroline's expression remained cautious. What exactly are you proposing? First, I want to rent an apartment in this neighborhood, Alexander said. Not a penthouse or anything flashy, something simple within walking distance. I need to be close, enough to be present for daily life, not just special occasions. He continued, his business-trained mind already formulating concrete steps. I'll restructure my work schedule. I've built a strong executive team. It's time I learned to delegate. I can handle most meetings virtually, and any necessary travel can be planned around the children's schedule. Alexander, Caroline interjected, I appreciate these ideas, but it's not that simple. You can't just walk into their lives and... A small sound from the hallway interrupted her. They both turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed elephant, her eyes wide in the dim light. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Caroline asked softly, immediately shifting into mother mode. I had the dream again, Lily whispered, the one about the big waves. Caroline opened her arms, and Lily quickly crossed the room to curl up in her mother's lap. Alexander watched as Caroline stroked their daughter's hair, murmuring quiet reassurances. Would you like some warm milk? Caroline asked. That usually helps, remember? Lily nodded against her mother's shoulder, then turned her head slightly to look at Alexander. You're still here, she observed quietly. I am, he replied gently. Are you going to be here tomorrow too? The question, so simple, yet so loaded with meaning, hung in the air. Alexander glanced at Caroline, who gave him a subtle nod. I'd like to be, he said carefully, if that would be okay with you and your brothers. Lily considered this, while Caroline prepared her warm milk in the kitchen. Could you maybe come see my art class on Saturday, she asked finally. We're having a small show, and everyone's supposed to bring their family. Alexander felt his heart constrict. I would be honored, he said sincerely. What time is the show? 10 o'clock, Caroline supplied, returning with a small cup of warm milk at the community center on Madison Street. She helped Lily take a few sips. But remember, honey, sometimes grown-ups have important work things they can't change. I'll be there, Alexander said firmly. 10 o'clock Saturday, I promise. The way Lily's face lit up made it clear. This was his first real test as a father. This simple promise to attend an art show would set the tone for everything that followed. After Caroline took Lily back to bed, she returned to find Alexander, pulling out his phone and finally turning it on. Instead of the expected flood of notifications making him reconsider his promise, she watched as he opened his calendar and began making changes. I'm canceling my flight to Tokyo, he explained, fingers moving swiftly across the screen. The merger review can be handled by my team. I'm also declining the conference in London next week. He looked up at her. I meant what I said, Caroline. I want to do this right. And what exactly is right in your mind? She asked, settling back onto the sofa. Being here for breakfast before school when I can, attending parent-teacher conferences, taking James to baseball practice. We'll find a way to make those lessons happen, helping Ethan pursue his interest in science and history, supporting Lily's art. He paused, then added softly, and finding a way to make peace with you, if that's possible. Caroline studied him thoughtfully. You understand that this means completely restructuring your life. No more spontaneous business trips, no more 70-hour work weeks. Children need consistency, Alexander. They need to know they can count on you showing up. I know, he nodded, and I'm ready for that. The irony is, I spent 5 years building a business empire to secure my future, only to realize I'd sacrificed the most important part of that future without even knowing it. He pulled up another app on his phone, this time a real estate listing. "There's a 2-bedroom apartment available in this building. Nothing fancy, but it would mean I could be here in minutes if needed. Would that be too close?" Caroline considered the question carefully. "The children's needs come first," she said finally. "Having you nearby would make shared responsibilities more manageable." "But Alexander," she fixed him with a serious look, "you need to understand something. These changes you're proposing, they have to be permanent. You can't decide in 6 months or a year that it's too difficult or that your business needs more attention. They've grown up without a father. I won't let them experience losing one." "I understand," he said quietly. "I can't undo the past. 5 years, but I can make sure the next 5 and all the years after are different. I want to be the father they deserve, Caroline. Not the man who abandoned their mother for business success, but someone they can count on, learn from, and trust." A small noise from the children's room caught their attention. Just the normal sounds of 3 sleeping children shifting in their beds. But it served as a reminder of what was really at stake in this conversation. Not just Alexander's redemption or Caroline's peace of mind, but the future happiness of 3 innocent lives who had no idea that their world was about to change. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the apartment building at 6:45 a.m., carrying a carefully selected box of breakfast pastries from a local bakery. He'd been up since 4:30, handling urgent emails and rescheduling meetings to clear his morning schedule. His executive team had been shocked by his sudden change in priorities, but years of building their trust meant they accepted his brief explanation of urgent family matters without too many questions. He hesitated before knocking, aware of how early it was, but Caroline had mentioned the children needed to leave for school by 7:45. To his surprise, he could already hear movement inside the apartment. When Caroline opened the door, she was fully dressed, hair tied back, clearly in the midst of the morning routine. "You're early," she said, but there was a hint of approval in her voice. "The kids are just getting up." The apartment was already alive with activity. The sounds of running water and children's voices drifted from the bathroom, accompanied by the gentle whir of what seemed to be a washing machine from somewhere in the building. "I brought breakfast," Alexander offered, holding up the box. "I remember you saying James likes chocolate croissants." Caroline's expression softened slightly. "That was 5 years ago." "Ah, he still does," came James's excited voice as he burst from the bathroom, toothbrush still in hand. "Are there really chocolate croissants?" "James, finish brushing your teeth," Caroline reminded him firmly. "And remember, we have a routine." In the morning, Alexander watched as she moved efficiently through the small space, multitasking with practiced ease. She was simultaneously ironing a small uniform shirt, checking homework folders, and keeping track of the bathroom rotation between the 3 children. "Would you like to help?" she asked, noticing his uncertain hovering. "Lunch boxes need to be packed. Everything's laid out in the kitchen." Grateful for the direction, Alexander moved to the kitchen, where he found 3 lunch boxes open on the counter, with sandwich ingredients and snacks neatly arranged. A note on the counter listed each child's preferences. Ethan, no crusts. James, extra turkey. Lily, cucumber slices separate. As he carefully assembled the sandwiches according to the instructions, he observed the morning chaos around him. Ethan emerged from the bedroom fully dressed in his school uniform, hair neatly combed, but struggling with his tie. Lily was having what appeared to be a minor crisis over mismatched socks. "The striped ones are in the dryer," Caroline called, out somehow aware of the sock situation without even looking. "Ethan, come here. Let me help with that tie." Alexander finished packing the lunches, adding small notes he'd written earlier that morning. "Good luck on your science quiz for James. Enjoy your library day for Ethan," He'd noticed the library schedule on the calendar and can't wait. To see your art on Saturday for Lily. Breakfast in 5 minutes, Caroline announced. James, your shirt is ironed. Lily, socks are on your bed. Ethan, do you have your permission slip for the museum trip? Alexander marveled at the choreography of it all. Each child knew their role in this morning dance, responding to Caroline's gentle but firm direction. He felt simultaneously impressed and ashamed, impressed by the efficient system she'd developed, ashamed that she'd had to do it all alone for so long. The children finally gathered at the table, uniforms mostly straight, hair mostly combed. The sight of the bakery box caused excitement, but Caroline quickly established order. 1 pastry each, she said firmly, and fruit first. She distributed apple slices and banana halves with practiced efficiency. Alexander sat somewhat awkwardly at the table, still learning the rhythm of this family breakfast. He noticed how Ethan methodically ate his apple slices in clockwise order, how James somehow managed to read his science textbook while eating, and how Lily arranged her banana slices into a smile pattern on her plate. "Did you sleep here?" Lily asked suddenly, looking up at Alexander with curious eyes. "No, I came over this morning," he replied. "I wanted to have breakfast with you all." "Where do you live?" James asked, through a mouthful of croissant, earning a gentle reminder about talking with food in his mouth from Caroline. "I have an apartment downtown," Alexander said, "but I'm actually looking at an apartment in this building. That way I could be closer and see you more often." This announcement caused a stir among the children. James immediately launched into a detailed description of the empty apartment on the 3rd floor, complete with commentary on its optimal location for paper airplane launching. Lily wondered if they could help decorate it. Only Ethan remained, quiet, thoughtfully chewing his pastry. "Will you be here tomorrow too?" he finally asked, his eyes serious behind his glasses. Alexander glanced at Caroline before answering. "If it's okay with your mother, I'd like to be here as often as I can." "We'll figure out a schedule," Caroline said diplomatically. "One that works for everyone. Now, backpacks ready in 2 minutes. Coats on." The flurry of activity that followed was dizzying. Caroline checked each backpack with lightning speed, while simultaneously helping Lily with a stubborn coat zipper and reminding James about his gym shoes. Alexander found himself naturally falling into a support role, holding doors and double-checking that lunch boxes made it into the correct bags. As they headed down the stairs, the elevator was perpetually out of order. Alexander noticed how the children had naturally paired off, James bouncing ahead with Lily, while Ethan walked more carefully, one hand on the railing. Caroline brought up the rear, carrying an extra sweater she knew from experience would be needed later. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows on the sidewalk as other families emerged from nearby buildings, all part of this grand morning. Migration to school. Alexander watched as Caroline hugged each child goodbye at the school gates, offering specific encouragement for the day ahead. "Good luck on your science quiz, James. Ethan, enjoy the new library books. Lily, have fun in art class." As the children disappeared into the building, Alexander stood with Caroline, both watching until they were out of sight. The morning light caught the silver strands in her hair, new since he'd last known her, and highlighted the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and worry. "This is what real life looks like," she said quietly, still gazing at the school entrance. "Not board meetings or business deals, just ordinary mornings, making sure they have clean clothes and homework done and enough food in their lunch boxes. This is what they need, Alexander. This consistency, this routine. Can you be part of that?" It wasn't really a question, he realized. It was a challenge, a test, and possibly an opportunity, if he could prove himself worthy of it. The rest of the week became an exercise in careful balancing for Alexander. After that first morning, he found himself reorganizing his entire life around the children's schedule. His executive assistant, Maria, had been stunned when he requested that all meetings be scheduled around school pickup times and afternoon activities. "Mr. Morgan," she'd said during their video call, "the Tokyo team is requesting an urgent meeting about the merger." "Schedule it for 9 a.m. their time," Alexander replied, checking the family calendar Caroline had shared with him. "I need to be free by 2:30 for a parent-teacher conference." The conference in question was with James's science teacher, Ms. Thompson. Caroline had suggested he attend alone, giving him a chance to understand their education firsthand. As he sat in the small classroom, surrounded by science projects and solar system models, Alexander felt more nervous than he had during any business presentation. "James has an extraordinary grasp of astronomical concepts," Ms. Thompson explained, showing him his son's latest project grades. "His enthusiasm is infectious, but sometimes he gets so excited about sharing his knowledge that he forgets to let others participate in class discussions." Alexander smiled, recognizing the trait. "I was the same way at his age," he admitted, "always eager to show what I knew." "He mentioned you might be starting a weekend science project together?" Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow inquiringly. Alexander nodded, thinking of the conversation he'd had with James the day before. "We're planning to build a telescope. James wants to see Jupiter's moons for himself." The teacher's approval was evident. "That kind of hands-on learning experience is exactly what he needs. Just maybe help him remember that not everyone shares his 6 a.m. enthusiasm for astronomical observations." The telescope project had been Alexander's first attempt at connecting with James individually. He'd spent hours researching beginner telescope kits, wanting something that would challenge and engage his son without frustrating him. The way James's eyes had lit up when he suggested the project had made every minute worth it. With Ethan, the connection was developing differently. Alexander had noticed his oldest son's careful observation of everything around him, the way he processed information before speaking. During one afternoon visit, he'd found Ethan struggling with a particularly complex puzzle. "May I join you?" Alexander had asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him. Ethan had nodded, then surprised him by asking, "Did you really live in Singapore?" "I did, for several years." "What's it like?" "My book says it's a city-state with unique architectural designs and efficient public transportation." And so began their first real conversation, with Ethan asking increasingly sophisticated questions about international business, different cultures, and global economics. Alexander found himself explaining complex concepts in simple terms, impressed by his son's ability to grasp abstract ideas. "Would you like to learn some Mandarin?" he'd offered, noting Ethan's interest in Asian cultures. The resulting smile had been small but genuine, and they'd spent the next hour learning basic characters, Ethan meticulously copying each stroke in his notebook. Lily proved to be his greatest challenge and joy. Her emotional openness was both touching and terrifying. She held nothing back, whether expressing delight or uncertainty. The art show on Saturday loomed large in her conversations, and Alexander found himself learning more about children's art techniques than he'd ever imagined possible. "This one's called Family in the Park," she explained, showing him her latest drawing during an afternoon visit. "See? That's Mommy with her guitar. And James is counting clouds, and Ethan's reading, and I'm drawing, and you're watching us from your bench." The picture caught him off guard. She'd drawn him in every subsequent version of that park scene, as if cementing his place in their narrative. The responsibility of living up to that trust weighed heavily on him. Caroline watched these developing relationships with cautious hope. She maintained clear boundaries, no lavish gifts, no dramatic changes to routine, but she allowed the connections to grow naturally. When Alexander asked about enrolling James in proper baseball lessons, she agreed on the condition that it wouldn't interfere with existing activities. "The community center has a youth league," she suggested. "It's more about learning and fun than competition. That would be better than the expensive training camp you were looking at." Alexander was learning to appreciate these gentle corrections. Caroline's insight into their children's needs was profound, shaped by years of careful attention to their individual personalities. He found himself constantly adjusting his instincts to solve problems with money, to aim for the most prestigious options, in favor of choices that would better serve their development. The apartment on the third floor became his new project. He approached it with the same attention to detail he'd used in business deals, but with a completely different focus. Instead of luxury fixtures, he prioritized practical features: a study, space for homework help, a small art corner with good natural light for Lily, bookshelves for Ethan's growing collection, and a telescope nook by the window for James's astronomical observations. "No cleaning service," Caroline had insisted when he mentioned hiring help. "They need to learn responsibility for their own space. You too." And so Alexander Morgan, who had never operated a washing machine in his adult life, found himself learning domestic skills alongside his children. James taught him their system for sorting recycling. Lily showed him how to properly clean paintbrushes, and Ethan quietly demonstrated the correct way to fold fitted sheets, a skill he'd apparently mastered from watching YouTube tutorials. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. Conference calls were occasionally interrupted by text messages about forgotten lunchboxes or changed pickup times. His pristine calendar became cluttered with notes about library days, art, classes, and baseball practice. But somehow, the chaos felt more meaningful than all the order of his previous life. One evening, as he was leaving after dinner and homework help, Ethan stopped him at the door. "I put Singapore on my map," he said, pointing to a world map on his bedroom wall where he tracked places he wanted to learn about. "But I marked it in yellow instead of red." "Oh? What's the difference?" "Red is for places I want to visit someday," Ethan explained seriously. "Yellow is for places that are already part of our family story." The simple observation stayed with Alexander long into the night, making him realize that while he'd spent years expanding his business across Asia, his most important impact might be in helping 3 children color their own maps of the world. The first real test of Alexander's commitment came 3 weeks into his new routine. He was in the middle of a crucial video conference with his Singapore team when his phone buzzed with a message from Caroline. "Ethan sick at school, fever, need pick up ASAP, can't leave work, understaffed." Alexander glanced at the faces on his screen, his top executives, major stakeholders, all waiting for his input on a billion-dollar decision. 5 years ago, this would have been the most important moment of his quarter. Now, he didn't hesitate. "I apologize, but we need to reschedule," he announced, already reaching for his coat. "Family emergency. Maria will coordinate a new time." He ended the call amid a flurry of confused responses and hurried out the door. At the school nurse's office, he found Ethan curled up on a cot, glasses folded neatly beside him. The normally composed child looked small and vulnerable, his face flushed with fever. When he saw Alexander, a mix of relief and uncertainty crossed his features. "I thought Mom would come," he said quietly. "Mom's at work, but I'm here," Alexander replied, signing the checkout forms. "Think you can make it to the car?" The next 24 hours became a crash course in parenting a sick child. Caroline had to finish her shift at the restaurant, so Alexander took Ethan back to his newly furnished apartment. Between calls to Caroline for medication instructions and frantically Googling normal temperature range for 5-year-olds, he discovered that caring for a sick child required a different kind of intelligence than running a corporation. "The thermometer's wrong," Ethan mumbled after Alexander's third attempt to get a reading. "Mom does it under the arm, not the mouth." These small moments of instruction, a child teaching his father basic parenting skills, became increasingly common as the weeks progressed. Sometimes they were humorous, like when Lily had to show him the proper way to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. "The jelly goes on first, Alexander, everyone knows that." Other times they carried a weight of unintended pain. "Don't you know how to tie a double knot?" James asked during baseball practice, his voice carrying a hint of disappointment that hit harder than any shareholder criticism. "Tommy's dad always does double knots." The mention of other fathers became a recurring theme, highlighting the gaps in Alexander's experience. The children had built their understanding of fatherhood from observing their friends' families, creating expectations that Alexander sometimes struggled to meet. The balance between his two worlds proved challenging. Despite his best efforts to reorganize his work life, crises still emerged that demanded his attention. One afternoon, he had to cut short a promised baseball practice with James due to an urgent call from Hong Kong. "It's okay," James said with forced brightness. "Mum says sometimes grown-ups have important things to do." The resigned acceptance in his son's voice haunted Alexander through the entire conference call. Later that evening, he found James in the apartment building's small courtyard, throwing a baseball against the wall alone. "I'm sorry about earlier," Alexander said, rolling up his sleeves. "How about we practice those curveballs now?" James shook his head. "Mom's making dinner soon. And anyway, you might have to leave again." The comment struck deep, forcing Alexander to confront the fragility of the trust he was trying to build. That night, after the children were in bed, he had a long conversation with Caroline. "They're protecting themselves," she explained, sorting through a basket of laundry. "They've learned to live without a father. Accepting you now, it's risky for them." "How do I prove they can count on me?" Alexander asked, automatically folding a small shirt with the careful precision Ethan had taught him. "Time," Caroline replied simply. "Consistent, reliable time. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, just being here, especially when it's inconvenient." The truth of her words was demonstrated the following week when Lily's art show arrived. Alexander had arranged everything perfectly, cleared his schedule, pressed his best suit, arrived early with flowers for the young artist. What he hadn't planned for was Lily's stage fright. "I can't do it," she whispered, clinging to Caroline's hand as other families filed into the community center. "My drawing isn't good enough." Alexander knelt down to her level, his expensive suit touching the floor without a second thought. "Want to know a secret? I get nervous before big presentations, too." Lily looked skeptical. "You do?" "Every time. But you know what helps? Looking at someone who believes in you. And I believe in you, Lily. I've seen how hard you worked on your art. But what if people don't like it? Then they're missing out on seeing something beautiful. But more importantly, you'll still have done something brave, sharing your art with the world. That's what real artists do." It wasn't an immediate fix, but gradually Lily's grip on Caroline's hand loosened. When her name was called to present her work, she managed to walk to the front of the room, her voice shaky but growing stronger as she explained her series of family portraits. The last drawing in her presentation was new, a scene of their building's courtyard, showing Alexander teaching James to pitch while Ethan read nearby and Lily herself sat sketching. She'd titled it, "My Whole Family." Looking at Caroline, Alexander saw tears in her eyes matching his own. They both understood what the drawing represented, not just a scene, but a hope, a possibility, a family slowly learning to be whole. That evening, as Alexander helped clean up after dinner, another skill he was gradually mastering, Ethan approached with his characteristic thoughtful expression. "I've been keeping data," he announced, showing Alexander a carefully maintained notebook, "about when you say you'll come and when you actually come." Alexander felt his heart skip. "And what does the data show?" "Your accuracy rate is 89.3% so far," Ethan reported. "That's better than most of my friends' dads, but there's still room for improvement." The methodical evaluation, so characteristic of his oldest son, somehow meant more than any corporate performance review. "What would you suggest to improve the percentage?" Ethan adjusted his glasses. Maybe you could teach me how to use spreadsheets. Then we could track the data together." It was such a small request, but Alexander recognized it for what it was. An olive branch, a chance to build something new with his son, 1 percentage point at a time. 2 months after that fateful day in the park, Alexander sat in his office, downtown, staring at the latest acquisition proposal from his Tokyo team. The numbers were impressive, the kind of deal that would have consumed his every waking moment just a few months ago. Now, all he could think about was that he'd promised to help Ethan prepare for his history presentation on ancient civilizations. His office, once a shrine to corporate success, had subtly transformed. Between the awards and market analysis charts, new items had appeared. Lily's drawings, carefully framed, James's first successful curveball, caught and signed by both of them. Ethan's meticulously crafted spreadsheet tracking their time together, now showing a 94.7% reliability rate. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Maria, his executive assistant, entered with a concerned expression. "The board is asking about your decision on the Tokyo expansion," she said. "They're worried about your recent shift in priorities." Alexander turned away from his computer screen, where he'd been researching Egyptian hieroglyphics for Ethan's project. "What exactly are they worried about?" "Your reduced travel schedule, the delegated meetings, the fact that you leave the office by 5 p.m. most days." Maria hesitated. "Some members suggest you've lost your edge." Alexander smiled, remembering something Caroline had said recently. Sometimes losing an edge means finding a center. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Schedule a board meeting for next week," he said. "It's time I explained some things to them." Later that afternoon, Alexander arrived at Caroline's apartment for their now regular family dinner. The scene that greeted him was carefully orchestrated chaos. Ethan surrounded by books about ancient Egypt, James demonstrating the water cycle, using a glass and a plate for his science homework, Lily coloring what appeared to be a new family portrait. "Alexander!" Lily called out. "Look what I made in art class today!" She held up a clay sculpture of what appeared to be a family group, each figure distinctively characterized. Caroline with a tiny guitar, James with a baseball cap, Ethan with glasses, and Alexander in what was unmistakably one of his business suits. "It's beautiful, Lily," he said, genuine emotion making his voice rough. "Is there a special occasion for this project?" "It's for Parents' Day next week at school," she explained. "Everyone's making something to show their family." Caroline emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I told her, we should check with you first, given your schedule." "I'll be there," Alexander said immediately. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. "What time?" 9 a.m. on Wednesday, Lily supplied hopefully. Alexander was already moving meetings before she finished speaking. "Done. Wouldn't miss it for anything." The evening progressed with its now familiar rhythm. Alexander helped James understand the water cycle, while Caroline assisted Ethan with his hieroglyphics. Lily worked on her art, occasionally asking for opinions on color choices. The apartment was filled with the comfortable sounds of a family engaged in shared activities. During dinner, James made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise. "Coach Jenkins asked if you'd help manage the team, Alexander," he said. between bites of Caroline's lasagna. Since you've been helping at practice and know all about statistics and stuff. Alexander glanced at Caroline, who nodded slightly. I'd be honored, he said, but only if you're comfortable with it, James. I don't want to intrude on your space. James grinned. Tommy says you throw better curveballs than his dad, but don't tell him I said that. After dinner, while the children were engrossed in their various activities, Alexander and Caroline had a moment alone in the kitchen. She was washing dishes while he dried them, another domestic rhythm they'd developed. The board wants to meet next week, he said quietly. They're concerned about my changing priorities. Caroline's hands stilled in the soapy water. Are you having second thoughts about the children? Never. He placed a dried plate in the cabinet, noting how he now knew exactly where everything belonged. But I am thinking about making some bigger changes. What kind of changes? I'm considering stepping down as CEO, he said, taking a chairman position instead. Less day-to-day management, more strategic oversight. It would mean more time here, more flexibility. Caroline turned to look at him, really look at him. That's a big decision, Alexander. Are you sure? He gestured toward the living room, where James was now explaining his water cycle project. To Lily, while Ethan offered corrections from behind his book. I spent 5 years building a business empire, thinking it was the most important thing in the world. Now, I know better. It's not just about being here more, Caroline said carefully. It's about being present when you are here, understanding their needs, their fears, their hopes. I know, Alexander nodded. Ethan's anxiety about the history presentation isn't just about the grade, it's about speaking in public. James's baseball isn't just about sports. It's about finding something that's his alone. And Lily's art, it's her way of making sense of how our family is changing. Caroline smiled softly. You're learning. I had a good teacher, he replied, then added more seriously, actually, I had 4 good teachers. A crash from the living room interrupted their moment. James's water cycle demonstration had apparently gone awry. As they rushed to help clean up the spill, Alexander found himself marveling at how natural it felt to grab paper towels and coordinate the cleanup effort, all while ensuring no one felt blamed for the accident. Later, during the bedtime routine, each child had a moment with him that reinforced his decision about the company. Ethan showed him a new column in his spreadsheet tracking quality of time alongside quantity of time. James wanted to practice his pitch one more time, even in pajamas. Lily asked him to help choose which family portrait should go on her parents' day display. As he was leaving for the night, Caroline stopped him at the door. The Children's Trust Fund, the one you set up last month, she began. What about it? I've been thinking, instead of just education, maybe we could allocate some for experiences. Family trips, summer camps, things that build memories. Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was the first time Caroline had talked about long-term future plans that included him. I'd like that, he said softly. Very much. Walking back to his apartment in the same building, no longer just a place to sleep, but a space slowly filling with evidence of 3 children's regular presence, Alexander realized that his transformation wasn't just about becoming a father. It was about becoming the person he should have been all along, the person his children and Caroline were helping him discover. 6 months after that life-changing afternoon in the park, Alexander found himself sitting on the same bench where everything had begun. This time, he wasn't alone. Caroline sat beside him, her guitar case resting at her feet, while the children played nearby in the late autumn sunshine. It feels different now, he said, watching James teach Lily how to throw a baseball while Ethan kept score in his ever-present notebook. Being here, Caroline nodded, her fingers absently tracing patterns on her guitar case. The last time I played here was that day you found us, she said. I haven't needed to since then. The changes in their lives had been both subtle and profound. Caroline had been able to reduce her working hours, taking on a management role at the restaurant that offered better pay and more regular hours. She still played music, but now it was for pleasure rather than necessity, teaching beginner guitar lessons at the community center where Lily took art classes. Alexander had followed through with his decision to step back from CEO duties, surprising. His board with a presentation that included not just business metrics, but photos of his children and honest words about priorities and legacy. The transition had been smooth thanks to years of building a strong executive team, and his new role as chairman gave him the flexibility his family needed while keeping him connected to the business he'd built. "Daddy!" Lily's voice carried across the park. "Look what James taught me." Alexander's heart still skipped a beat every time they called him Daddy, a term that had emerged naturally over time, never forced, never demanded. He watched as Lily demonstrated her newly learned throwing technique, the ball wobbling through the air, but traveling in more or less the right direction. "That's excellent form, sweetheart," he called back, earning a beaming smile. "Her art. Teacher says she has unusually good hand-eye coordination," Caroline remarked. "Probably all those hours drawing." Speaking of drawing, Alexander pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket. The Children's Museum called. They want to feature Lily's family series in their Young Artists Gallery next month. Caroline's eyes widened. "All of them?" "All 12 pieces," Alexander confirmed. They were particularly impressed with how the series shows the evolution of a family over time. They both knew which pieces he meant. Lily had continued drawing their family throughout the months, each picture capturing the subtle changes in their relationships. The first showed them as separate units, Caroline with the children, Alexander watching from afar. But each subsequent drawing brought them closer together, adding details that reflected their growing connections. Alexander, helping with homework, family dinners, baseball games, museum visits, quiet moments, reading together. "Did you tell her yet?" "I thought we could tell her together," he said. "Maybe over dinner tonight." Caroline smiled, a warm, genuine expression that had become more frequent lately. "Family dinner at your place or mine?" "Actually," Alexander began carefully, "I've been thinking about that." He pulled out another envelope. "The apartment next to yours is becoming available next month. The one with the connecting door that the building manager mentioned? I thought maybe." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. They'd been taking things slowly, rebuilding trust alongside their family bonds. Caroline took the envelope, opening it to examine the floor plans he'd included. "You've already figured out how to arrange everything," she observed, noting his penciled annotations. "Just ideas," he said quickly. "The connecting door could stay locked, of course, but it would give us options. The children could have spaces in both apartments. We could take things at whatever pace feels right." Before Caroline could respond, they were interrupted by Ethan's arrival at their bench. "I've completed the statistical analysis," he announced, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Would you like to see the results?" "Statistical analysis of what, honey?" Caroline asked. "Family happiness indicators," Ethan replied matter-of-factly, opening his notebook. "I've been tracking key metrics over the past 6 months. He pointed to a carefully drawn graph. "See? The trend line shows a steady increase in positive family interactions, with a statistically significant jump after Alexander moved into the building." Alexander and Caroline exchanged amused but touched looks. Trust Ethan to quantify their family's journey. "And what's your conclusion?" Alexander asked seriously, respecting his son's methodical approach. Ethan adjusted his glasses. "The data suggests that closer proximity correlates with higher satisfaction levels. Therefore, logical next steps would indicate..." He paused, showing a rare moment of uncertainty. Perhaps further integration of living spaces. Caroline laughed softly. Have you been reading the apartment listings again? James and Lily helped, Ethan admitted. We've been calculating optimal room arrangements for various scenarios. Have you now? Caroline's voice was warm with amusement and something else, understanding, perhaps, that their children had been thinking about these possibilities too. A shout from the playground drew their attention. James had apparently convinced Lily to try catching now, and both children were calling for parental witnesses to their achievements. As Alexander and Caroline walked over to watch, Ethan trailing behind with his notebook, the scene felt both familiar and new. A family finding its rhythm, its own unique way of being together. Later that evening, after the excitement of Lily's museum news had died down and the children were in bed, Alexander and Caroline sat in her small kitchen, sharing the last of the celebration cake. You know, Caroline said thoughtfully, the children aren't the only ones who've changed over these months. Alexander nodded, thinking of his transformed priorities, his new understanding of what really mattered in life. We all have. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The power lunches, the international deals, being the unstoppable Alexander Morgan? He considered the question carefully. I thought I would, he admitted. But yesterday, I had to cancel a video call with Singapore because Lily had a stomachache and wanted her daddy. 5 years ago, that would have felt like a failure. Now it feels like a privilege. Caroline reached across the table and took his hand, a simple gesture that held the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future. So, she said, glancing at the floor plan still sitting on the counter, should we tell the children about the apartment idea tomorrow? Alexander squeezed her hand gently. Maybe we should let them show us their calculations first, he suggested, with a smile. I have a feeling they've already figured it all out. Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm. But inside this small apartment, and the growing spaces of love and trust they were building together, a family had found its way home. In the children's room, Lily's latest family portrait hung on the wall, showing all of them together in the park. But this time, there was no one watching from a distance. They were all in the picture, all part of the story, exactly where they belonged. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.